have the privilege this morning of introducing my husband to you. I met Joe when I was 12 years old and he was 16. At that time he had a head full of dreams, a heart full of hope, and a faith in a God. And I thought, that's a pretty good combination. I think I'll go where this man's going. And let me tell you, the journey has been exciting. As he's gone from a 20-year Air Force career to a businessman, to a ministry leader. But he still has in his heart today, after 55 years of marriage, a head full of dreams, a heart full of hope, and a God that he serves and loves and believes in. I remember the dedication of my, 8th grandchild, and his father is here this morning. We're going to have them stand in a minute. But his name is Brady Bennett. Bennett meaning blessing from God, and that's the reason my son named him that. But his other grandfather is a minister. And Dr. Nixon was in our church dedicating this baby. He's about 3 months old. And he had in his hand a baton. And it was beautiful. And Brady, I was standing right next to the parents, watching Brady. You know how grandparents are, so proud of those grandchildren. Watching Brady. And his face was like he was in on the conversation and understood every word. As his grandfather said to Brady's father, my son, Keith, here is the baton. We are passing it to you to pass it to your son, to teach him about the ways of God and be an example before him. And he would smile on cue. It was like he knew when to smile. And even his grandfather says, well, you're understanding this, aren't you? We have seen God work so many miracles in our family. But the greatest blessing, this man has had many, many successes, victories, triumphs. But today, he still feels that his greatest treasure in life is his God and his family. I want my 2 sons to stand, and if you consider yourself a spiritual son of ours, and I see some of you out there, would you all, Keith and David Grimaud, would you stand? And then Anthony, you're a spiritual son. Chad, David, you are a spiritual son of ours. We thank God for you. And now here is the man that has the most words.
You know, this past month, every time I turn on my computer, I see this picture about 12 different places. I think I owe that to Reverend Redfern. Let me just say that we're going to show a little short video in just a moment, and someone here is responsible for doing that, so just let them know to cue that up if you would, and in just a minute we'll introduce that. But God has been a wonderful blessing to me, and he's a blessing to me by you being here this morning. Now, I have in my pocket here some notes about what to talk about and all the things, and reminiscent of CityLight. These notes are not so I would remember what to say. I know what to say. I lived it. So I know what to say. These notes are so you won't be here all day. So I know that there's a portion when I get through that page, the speech should be about halfway through, okay? So you'll miss a lot in this, but let me tell you what I have decided, because they rely on me to do a little article in this Catalyst magazine each month. And she is on me and saying, because I'm usually, the day before the deadline getting that article, it is to write those things. And she says, how about giving me 2 a month so that I'm prepared for the next month? Well, if any of you have listened to our radio commercials, you know it's just a constant little thing there of the family life and our life, and we don't have to, I can write those out because all I have to do is write down the events. So I have decided if you want to know all the details about CityLight, just keep watching the Catalyst magazine as it goes forward, because I'm going to start going through those little events there in a lot more detail. I was sitting here thinking about that and thinking of some of the things Chris said. And do you know that Saddam Hussein had something to do with this?
Yes, he did.
He did. Because my company had been bought out by a group of Arabic people, primarily together with a banker. And all of a sudden I got a call one day to come up there. They wanted to talk to me. And this president of the company said, hey, we need your help. We're in trouble. So why me? Where are all these Arabic people with all their money? Oh, Saddam Hussein just went into Kuwait. And they're Kuwaitis. They don't know where their money is. All of a sudden, Saddam Hussein started affecting my life. And I ended up as president of the company with an investment of my own because I was operating under its umbrella. And there is the elements of the start of the story. But before we show that, I want to leave it to my fellow men here to show this little video.
A few years ago, I told you about a situation that happened to me a number of years ago in South Carolina. I was doing a crusade at Bryce Stadium, the football stadium of the University of South Carolina, and the weather report said there was rain coming. There were 25,000 people that had gathered in the stadium. And so we wanted to pray before the service that God would hold back the rain. And we prayed, God, hold back the rain, hold back the rain. And, you know, we were doing safe prayers, if it's your will. And Lord, you know, if you don't want it to rain. And we would just try to cover our backs in case it rained anyway. And there was this little teeny short lady named Linda. Linda asked, after all the professionals prayed, after all the preachers prayed, Linda stood up. She said, do you mind if I pray? Linda opened up the prayer and said, Lord, your name is at stake. We told these people that if they would come, they would hear a word from God. If they come and you let it rain and you control the weather, then you look bad. Because we told them you wanted to say something to them. So if we told them you wanted to say something to them and you don't keep back what you control so it could be said to them, then your name is bad. And then she threw a line that caused everybody to look at each other. She said, therefore right now I command you in the name of the Lord Jesus Christ to stop the rain for the sake of your name. The preachers just started looking at one another with one eye. We just said, whoa. We went up on the platform. The sky is now getting black behind us. A guy was in touch with the Weather Bureau, and they said the showers are coming, they're heavy thunderstorms, and they're coming right at you. We're now hearing at 7 o'clock, the music begins to play. We begin the service, and there is thunder and lightning right behind us. People start to stir in their seats. Some start to get up. Some start to open umbrellas. Linda was on the stage. This man opened his umbrella over Linda. She said, that's okay, I don't need it. I've only seen this happen one time. The rain came to the stadium and split. Half of it went this way, half of it went that way, and then met again on the other side of the stadium. Now, this is not a story somebody told me. I was there. I was there. A whole bunch of other people were there. And we saw a miracle right in front of our eyes because a little lady knew his name. She knew his name. She understood that his name represented his character, and she appealed to that. Why don't we appeal to that name? Because we don't know that name. And we do not understand how passionate God is for his own reputation.
But where did this all begin for Joe Grimaud? It probably began in 1934. Because in 1934, a guy named Mordecai Ham and W.J. Ramsey had a revival in Charlotte, North Carolina. Billy Graham was saved in that revival. But that didn't impact me. What impacted me was that my father was saved in that very same revival. And he raised his children. It was a change in his life at the age of 25. I remember him saying so many times, he knew I needed more instruction than most, so he managed to always be my Sunday school teacher. When I'd get promoted, he would get promoted. And so it seemed like he was always my Sunday school teacher. And I can remember him saying, I was up there and Mordecai Ham stood up and said, your sins are like filthy rags. And he said, I looked at myself and I saw a bunch of filthy rags. And I went forward and accepted Christ as my Savior. And my dad impacted my life. Well, there was another place. There was a group when the bomb plant was built over here. We don't call it that anymore, but that's what we called it back in those days in the early 50s. And a group of construction workers moved in there, and a man moved in there with a little girl in the Barnwell, South Carolina. And somebody from Child Evangelism Fellowship came into that trailer park and put on a good news fellowship. And a little girl was impacted by that. And she got a yearning for God in her life. And she later became my wife when they moved across the road from us, and we got acquainted and became my wife. So you might say that's the seed of it. But you might say it's down on Wheeler Hill, where a young black man grew up and he made a guess. And one day he accepted Christ as his Savior and became a big part. And I could go on and on and on. And I could tell you about a man named Henry Clare down in the Bahamas who was living a wayward life. Might have been selling drugs, it seems that I remember, doing other things. But he had a praying mama. He had a praying mama that wouldn't quit praying. And he's sitting down here, and he was a feisty young man, and he's a feisty preacher today. So he didn't change that about him, but he changed a lot of things. And he was very helpful during the formation of this crusade, let me tell you. Each one of them. Well, one day I went in for lunch at my home, and I saw this big black dude being interviewed on what was then called the Carolina Noonday Show. And I thought, boy, he looks like Mr. T. This is a strange-looking guy, but what he's saying sure makes a lot of sense. And I called Gladys, come in and listen to this guy. It's weird, you know. And we listened, and I said, man, he makes so much sense in what he's saying. The next day, we were leaving on a flight to Utah, and I got to the airport, and there was this big black dude sitting over there, and I had to go over and meet him, and I did. And from that led to a series of bringing him back into schools around Columbia. It turned out that later on I found out that Brother Eddie Guess had invited him to come and speak in the schools. So there are these seeds. That's how God is working and bringing things together in ways we can't even conceive of. And so now Saddam Hussein entered the picture, and I ended up going up to Leesburg, Virginia, just outside of Washington, D.C. And in the process of doing that, because of this black man that had impacted me so on that TV show, we sponsored him to come in there. And through that led to us adopting a school down in the Olympia section of Washington, D.C., in the inner schools. And we felt like, hey, we're doing so much good here. But then, after 4 years, from 91 to 95, while we did that and things grew, and we sponsored him as he went around the country speaking in schools, and our company did. I was in a position that I could promote that. And then we had the board of directors of that company wanted to go back and do the same thing that I felt like had gotten it into trouble in the first place before we got it out. And I said, it's time for me to leave, folks, and go back to Columbia. But I got back here and I felt lost. Washington, D.C. is not the city of the people who live in Washington, D.C. You know that is our city? That's right. They formed that. Our founding fathers founded that city, and they didn't make it a state. It's everybody's city. And yet, around our Capitol building, there's probably as much or more crime and things that are going on in that city as any city or more than any city in the United States. So we felt like we were having a part and an impact. Now all of a sudden, hey, Lord, what are you doing with me? Here I am back in Columbia. And we were doing so much there, and this came to an end. And then I got a call, or Gladys got a call, from Linda White, who was the manager of WMHK Radio at that time, because Gladys had promoted some women's group things and had worked with WMHK, and so she wanted to meet with us at a restaurant out in Harbison for breakfast. We didn't know what she wanted. And we were sitting there having breakfast together, and she said, I thought you might have some ideas. WMHK is coming up on its 20th anniversary celebration. And maybe you would have an idea of a speaker that we could have to come and be our special speaker for this major event. And we kind of looked at each other because, you see, for 4 years, from 91 to 95, running that company was a real burden. And I needed to get back to my local church every Sunday. And I like to fly. My wife doesn't like to fly. So we managed to get through that 4 years without a divorce because I insisted on flying back to Columbia, and she didn't want to come. But I needed my church to minister to me during that time because I was under a terrific burden. But when we would leave church on Sunday night, heading back to Winnsboro Airport to get into my little puddle jumper and fly back to Virginia, Tony Evans would be on the radio. He hadn't been on long. And we listened to that message. I said, you know, this man has the message that our nation needs. He has got the right words. I'm telling you, he still does, as an example. He still has that message. So when Linda asked us that question, we looked at each other and said, well, Tony Evans, he's the best thing you got on your radio. Oh, we can't get he's gotten so famous and so popular that sometimes we don't even get answers to our letters when we send to him. He's just gotten so much to do. Well, it turned out because we had made contact with him there in D.C. to try to get him to work with us on those schools, and we had helped him get sponsorship on a radio station in the D.C. area so others could hear that gospel, that he had invited us to a meeting at the Cove. Now, God's working through this. Now, I want you to not forget how these things come together. And he had invited us to a meeting in the Cove, Billy Graham's Cove, up in some of his followers and supporters up in Asheville. So we said to Linda, well, and this event now was going to take place in only about 3 or 4 months. And Dr. Evans is in great demand. You can't just get him for 4. You better, if you're going to get him in all, you better plan a couple of years ahead, probably. Well, said, let us see what we can do. And we went up and we asked Dr. Evans, could you meet with us after this event, and just for a few minutes? And we posed the question of him coming for that celebration event. And there was a little communication failure in there when he said he couldn't come the next year, but he'd come the following. Well, that wouldn't work. The celebration event, the 20-year would be over. But his director, his executive director, thought he said the following year. And because of that misstatement in communications, he made a break in his program and decided to come 3 months later and be part of that celebration. Now, when I had, God working, right? Now, when I had said to Linda, was talking to Linda, I said, Linda, where are you going to have this event? She said, we're going to have it in the Township Auditorium. I said, Township Auditorium? Tony Evans, God's man, for the hour? Linda, why don't you have him in the Coliseum? Oh, that would be embarrassing. We had him in the Coliseum and didn't have very many people show up. Well, it could be embarrassing. Well, how many people do you sponsor other events in the township? Oh, yeah. How many does it hold? Oh, about 2,800. I said, how do you do in that? Oh, we pretty well pack it out. Well, how many do you need to get in the Coliseum to feel good about it? Oh, we need at least 5,000. You can get 2,800 with these other people in the township, and you don't think with Tony Evans you can get 5,000 in the Coliseum? I embarrassed her. God embarrassed her. She said, okay, she got the Coliseum. And let me tell you, you can do some things sometimes, but all of a sudden when the night comes or the day comes, you know, and you're around the corner and say, well, will there going to be any cars in the parking lot? You know, I'll tell you, all of a sudden the things you said back there kind of come back to you, you know. And so we rounded the corner and wow, the parking lots were all full. And we went in there and 8,500 people came out to the Coliseum that night to hear Dr. Tony Evans. Now there was another thing that I had said to Linda during that breakfast meeting. I said, Linda, my dream for Tony Evans is not the Coliseum, it's the South Carolina Stadium. He's that good. Yep. I don't know why I said that. I had never thought about that before. I just knew he was that good. I knew that it was there. God coming together. So she said something else to me. She said, well, if you feel that way about it and want to do something like that, there's a guy downtown that has bought a building on Washington Street. He's a former Presbyterian minister named Pete Cannon. Pete is looking over the portals of heaven today down on us as we talk. There's a guy named Pete Cannon, and he's got his hands out in the ministries here, both black and white and whatever. He's ministry all over the city, and you need to meet him. I just chalked that away, went home, and by now we had formed, by the time we got back from Asheville and we formulated that situation about the Coliseum, and Tony had agreed to come, and just a couple of days after that, my phone rang, and I answered, and he says, this is Pete Cannon. Are you the one who has something to do with Tony Evans coming to town? I said, well, I guess so. And he looked at me and said, don't worry, it's already been done. Yep. I mean, that was just about the reaction of his facial expression. Don't worry about it, it's already been done. Said, what are you talking about? I said, there's a guy named Jimmy Jones who started a prayer group for Columbia down at the Elmwood Church of God a couple of years ago. And it has grown, and they've been meeting on a weekly basis. And they want to have a citywide revival in the stadium. Now, God was preparing in another direction. Prepared Eddie Guess. He prepared Pete Cannon. He prepared Jimmy Jones. He even worked on Little Me. And Jimmy Jones has been praying for this revival. And not only that, they've been trying to get a hold of Tony Evans to come and be the speaker, and he can't even get past his secretary. Well, a little instrument, maybe a little grain of sand that God can run his wagon on, just one little grain of sand. That's all I want to be. And once again, as we used that and came together and then started having monthly meetings and talking about that, but there's an element I'm missing because we go back to the Coliseum. As these things began to germinate, I began to think, well, how can we take this Coliseum event and move it, if God wants it, to move it to the stadium? Does he want it? If he doesn't want it, it's not going to happen through me. He's got to want it. And so I asked Linda, would you let me take up the offering at the event? Now, let me tell you, by now, Governor Beasley is involved, and he has invited Tony to stay overnight in the governor's mansion. By the way, you don't want to do that. Don't want to do that. That's a public place. Tony stayed in there one night, and they made him move out of the room the next day because a tour group was coming through. So you don't want to do that. Stay away from the governor's mansion. But anyway, he stayed in the governor's mansion. He was honored with that. And that night at the Coliseum, as that crowd gathered, 8,500 people, black and white, at a time when the Confederate flag was flying over the Capitol, there were church burnings all over the place, and all the news media, and all the dissension and the problems. And here was a crowd that had gathered to hear Dr. Evans, of a ratio of about 60-40, of white to black, that had come to hear God's man. And as the governor walked in, it was quiet. But when Tony Evans came through that door, that crowd came to its feet. This was God's crowd. It wasn't the governor's crowd. It was God's crowd. And they came to their feet. Now, when I got up to ask for the offering, I had talked to Linda. I said, Linda, how much does I don't know anything about these stadium events and these big Billy Graham type revivals and stuff. How much do they raise? Well, she told me, now I didn't tell them, but she told me generally they only get about $1 a person from those people coming to those events, about $1 a person. The other way they raise the funds is through these other promotions that go on before, and people's hearts touch, and they give donations. So I knew about what to expect out of that crowd. There were 8,500 people there, then you'd get $8,500. So that wasn't enough. And we were raising money for WMHK. We had to pay for the Coliseum. It was enough to pay for the Coliseum. But I got everybody to stand to the feet. I want you to stand to the feet and get off of your pocketbooks right now. If your purse is nearby, pick it up. If you got a checkbook in there, take it out. I want you to have it ready, because now I want to tell you the story. And I told the little story that you've heard up to now. Okay? And I said, my vision for Tony Evans is to go to the stadium. Now, Linda has told me how much to expect out of a crowd like this. I want to tell you something. I want you to vote with your pocketbook, and I'll know how interested you are in forwarding God's word. If you were going to put in $1, I want you to put in 3. If you were going to put in 20, I want you to put in 60. Well, I got through with that. And we also had some little cards if they wanted to participate in committees and so forth, to sign on those cards and pass them in so we would know who really was turned on to that. And a couple of days later, when they finished counting all the money, it took not that long because there were a lot of, the lady who was taking it up said, I got in the elevator with all these buckets. I had never seen so much money in my life. It's all there, buckets of money all around me. They had the police there guarding. And they got through counting, and there was $34,500, about 4 times the amount. Did God want us to go forward? God spoke through his people that he wanted to go forward. From that, a committee was formed, and we started meeting once a month. Now, that was just the first of the miracles. The miracles began to flow. And as we met each month, you know what a committee is?
Joe, be careful.
Lad says be careful. But let me tell you, it's not all bad. It's not all bad. A committee is an anchor you drag to the goal, you know. But that's good, because it does things that shouldn't be easy, that you need to consider, that you need to work at. You need that grinding to make it happen. And so we formed a committee. And the committee said, well, how are we going to get this thing together? How are we going to get it rolling? We got to get the black ministers involved, because in the black society, they'll only be involved if the preacher says yes. If the preacher says, so well, how are we going to do that? One of the biggest black denomination in the state is the AME Church, and somebody knew that a new pastor had just come over here to Bethel AME, and they said, maybe we can get him. Maybe we can get him. Ronnie Brailsford, thank you. My wife, did you ever see these things of President Reagan, and his wife was always nearby whispering in his ear? I got my own wife over here. He has to do a lot of whispering. So somebody knew him, and they called him, and he came over to one of the very first committee meetings we had up on the 10th floor of Pete Cannon's building. Now, there's something symbolic about that, too, because, you know, from that window you could look out and see the steeple of First Baptist Church. You know the history of First Baptist Church? Yep. If you look in the yellow pages on your telephone book, I don't know how many of you still use those things, but if you look in the first of the yellow pages, and I think it's still there, it listed as a historical place because the first secession convention was right there in First Baptist Church. The first shot in the Civil War was fired at Fort Sumter in Charlotte. We're right in the middle of that history, right in the middle of it. And yet here were some black and white coming together for God to do what God would have them do. Well, somebody knew about him, called him, and he came right over. Now, I didn't know if Ronnie Brailsford even knew who Tony Evans' name was, what his name was, or who he was. And he came over, and Ronnie Brailsford stood up there, and when we told him about what we were about to do, he lit into a speech about Tony Evans. He had been taking this course about, is God preparing? Is God bringing things together? About Tony Evans and how it had impacted his own life. And that committee was enthused after Ronnie Brailsford's talk that day with that little committee. Some of these people, Eddie, Brother Claire, I don't remember, I'd miss some names if I tried to call them, the ones, Lee Adams, that were there together in that first meeting. But anyway, we decided to start having monthly meetings. But the committee said, oh, maybe we need to go back to the Coliseum. That stadium is big. Maybe we need to go back. No, we've been to the Coliseum. We've been to the Coliseum. God wants us to move on. The vision is the stadium. And the committee just kept, I don't know. Well, about that time, Tony Evans was starting to have these marriage enrichment seminars, but you had to pay $29 a person to go to that. So, well, what if we had one of these? I'm now making pretty close contact with him. What if we had him come back in and do a marriage enrichment ceremony here? How many people would we need to have in order for you to feel like God was making the fleece wet? And they said, well, if you're going to pay $29 a piece, you're not going to get the kind of people you get on volunteer. Maybe 1,000 people. I called Tony Evans, and I said, how big a facility do we need for one of these? He said, it would be good to have a church of about 3,000. I looked around, there's only one church in town. There might be another one now with Brooklyn since it's grown. There's only one church in town that'll accommodate close to 3,000, and that was First Baptist Church. Same church, the steeple we're looking at. And so I called Dr. Estep and said, what, can we have that meeting in First Baptist Church? Sure, Joe, we'll have it there. So in preparing for this, in one of our meetings coming up, I had contacted Dr. Evans about sending somebody in to work with us. Now, there were a couple times when I said, Tony, when are you going to take this thing over? He said, oh, no, you don't understand. You don't understand. If I take over, it dies when I leave. This is your baby. I'm just your speaker. Yep. A lot of wisdom there 15 years ago, right? All right. So the night before that event, when Dr. Evans' man was coming into town, I got a call from Dr. Estep. Said, Joe, I've made a terrible mistake. I didn't know, and there's already something planned in there, and I can't accommodate that at First Baptist Church. Well, we're fixing to make an announcement the next morning about the meeting that is going to be in First Baptist Church, this marriage enrichment seminar. Well, there was another Baptist pastor. There had been very few of them. But there was another Baptist pastor that had been coming to our monthly meetings. And his name was Pastor Boyd from the Trentham Road Baptist Church. And said, Pastor Boyd has been coming to our meetings. Let's call him and see if he'll let us have his church. And so we called him. And he said, absolutely. Later on, I talked to him, and he said, I thought Santa Claus had called me. Now, I don't know if you work with the Baptists. Some of you may not work with it. They don't usually decide anything. The pastor doesn't. Not like our pastor here. He can make a decision, and we say, yeah, Pastor, we're all for it. In the Baptist church, you got to go back to one of these committees, So but he didn't go to any committee. He said, absolutely. And we had that, and we had about 1,003 come out to that session at North Trentham Road Baptist Church. But then we had another meeting. Okay, we did it. We did over 1,000, ready to go to the stadium. Oh, yeah, but we don't have the black pastors with us, and they're not coming, and, I just don't know how we're going to do it. And so I called back to Brother Brailsford again and said, Brother Brailsford, can you get me an appointment with Bishop John Hurst Adams, the bishop of the Methodist Church for all of South Carolina? So I'll see what I can do. And we went over there and met with him. Big old burly guy, who was big in the civil rights movement early in the years. And he let me know that quickly. He's very, very, very forthright in his what he says. He says, well, let me tell you, I can't support it. I'll tell you about my life. My life was developed on the civil rights thing, and that's what I'm all about, and at my age, it's not going to change, and that's what And I said, Bishop, would you just do one thing? Would you not oppose us? Oh, no, I won't oppose you. I'll let the churches know. If you want to participate, go ahead and participate, and I won't oppose you. And then I said something else. I said, Bishop Adams, I don't think I've ever met with a bishop before. I don't know how to treat a bishop. Can you hug a bishop? And he reached those big old arms around me and pulled me to him and said, man, in our culture, that's the way we meet. Every time I saw Bishop John Hurst Adams after that, we had a big hug. A big hug. God working together to bring things together. So I don't know exactly what impact that had, but it kept a negative impact from happening. And we continued forward. Now, a few days after that meeting in Pearl Road, and we had another meeting, and there was concern still. Oh, I don't know. I still think we ought to go back to the Coliseum. We could do it in the Coliseum. I got a call on my phone again. That phone, it was being used by God. And it was Pastor Boyd from the Trim Road Baptist Church, and he said, Joe, I went to a meeting this morning of the South Carolina Southern Baptist Convention, and Bill Mackey was there. He's the director of evangelism. They're fixing to have a big conference here, evangelism conference, out at the new church out here near Fort Jackson, Shandon Baptist Church. And he said, I tried to get Tony Evans to come speak at this thing, and I got back from your meeting there at North Rim Road, and there was a letter on my desk, a letter of regret from Tony Evans. Why is it that I can't get him for the whole South Carolina convention, and you got him out at North Trim Road? He says, I don't know, talk to Joe Grimaud. I don't know how I did it. Well, it directed God moving.
Yes, yes.
And so I called Bill Mackey, he gave me his number, and I called him. And we met over here in the Embassy Suites. Thought we'd just meet for lunch. About 3 hours later when we dismissed. And I said to Bill Mackey, Bill, if we had this out at Shandon Baptist, all we'd be able to do is invite pastors because it won't hold enough people. What if you came down to the South Carolina Coliseum for that night for your evangelism conference and just move it there for that one night and have the rest of it out at Shandon? He said, oh, Joe, that would be the biggest evangelism conference and that meeting that we've ever had. I said, oh, but it's basketball season, Joe. We can't. University of South Carolina has the priority on the Coliseum during basketball season, and so we'll never be able to get that Coliseum. I left that meeting and went, by now, the people down at the Coliseum knew Joe Grimaud, okay? So I walked in there and I told him what we wanted, and he went over there to the map, and there was one night open. Guess what night it was? It was the night that we needed for the evangelism conference. God working. God, how do these things all flow together without the conflict? God working. Well, we had that meeting in there, and we had 12,500 come out to the evangelism conference meeting that night, and we shared again about the meeting. Well, the anchor was getting a little less drawn, a little less tight as things were going on, and they were seeing God as everybody was seeing God working. And so now with the question, well, we got to get permission to use that stadium. We'll have to go to the athletic director and how are we going to do that? Well, a group of us, Henry Clare, Eddie Gies, Pete Cannon, might have been another one or two with us, and we went down there and had a meeting with Dr. Mike McGee, the director of athletics, and I'm telling you, he didn't talk positive at all. He said, listen, we had the Pope come in here and met in the stadium, and it was an embarrassment to the city because only about 30,000 people came out to see the Pope. It was an embarrassment, and you're wanting to go in there and have this meeting in the stadium. That's where the feisty little preacher down here got involved. The feisty little preacher got involved, and I think he embarrassed Dr. McGee. I think he really did. And so Dr. McGee agreed that we could come, and he pointed out a lot of things we'd have to do and gave us a lot of guidance. But he came across God coming together. So we began to prepare. Well, how are we going to do this? Well, we're meeting here on the 10th floor down on Washington Street. There's not much parking place for volunteers. Pete's been gracious to give us a place to meet down there. But there's an empty building out, old Pontiac building, I believe, out at Elmwood in Maine. If we had that, that'd be right at the center of all that traffic, and we could set up a headquarters there, preparing for it. And so I went to see Sam Jones out there at the dealership. He agreed at a very reasonable price to lease us that place. And we went in there and began to prepare. And people started coming in off the street. I remember one lady coming in skating, say, hey, how can I be a part of this? But we needed churches involved. And so we came up with the idea that if we started this thing, now how do we make it a success? If the first night is a failure, the paper's going to be terrible to us. It's terrible. Well, maybe we ought to do things a little different. Have the first night on Sunday night and invite all the churches to bring their church congregations out for Sunday night. And so we put that together, and we got some of this vinyl siding that, and put it on the side of the building. And when a church would agree to participate, we'd put their name up there. First Baptist Church, First Church of the Nazarene, Pentecostal Holiness Church, Church of God, or whatever, Elmwood Church of God. And as people came by, they began to come in the door and say, hey, why is my church not up there? I said, I don't know, why is it not up there? What are you doing about it? And so it kept growing and growing until finally, by the crusade time, there were 240 churches listed up there. God coming together. Then we got a billboard company to donate us a big 80-foot long billboard with a picture of Dr. Tony Evans and place it there on the side of that building. Now, do you know what is in that building today? Today, Christ Central owns that whole block. Christ Central started right there on that corner. So God is still coming together. Okay? Now Redfern's back there waving his hand. I don't know if that means stop or that means you're doing good.
Please stop. You didn't feel this?
Okay, I'm going to have to rush right along. But we had a lot of these people who you see sitting around you coming together. I told you this would take 3 hours, and I forget to look at the paper. But the miracle started happening. We went together. We went in the stadium, and Dr. Evans. Now, one of the tough times was we were there worried about this thing, and Dr. Evans. All of a sudden, we got a letter from Dr. Evans. He was going to be around. He's supposed to start speaking at 7:30. His plane was arriving in Atlanta at 6 o'clock. 6 o'clock. Well, man, sometimes those planes don't make it out of Atlanta. And what if he's late? What if we got this crowd here? Are we going to tell him, well, Dr. Evans didn't make it. He didn't show. And so I called Jim Hamilton, the manager over at the downtown airport. I said, Jim, listen. And I told him a little bit about it. And he said, Joe, I'll go over there and get him. I'll meet him at the gate. Now, that was back before all the security thing was. Jim Hamilton had a relatively fast piston airplane, Aerostar, and he went over there and met Tony Evans, and Tony Evans got here before the meeting even started. So we got the meeting going, that miracle. We took care of that. On the third night, now people came forward in droves. We had 40,000 people, about 60% white and about 40% black that came out to that meeting that first night and each night. About 40,000 the first night, about 20,000, and the newspaper was good to us. It looked like a Billy Graham crusade. If you remember back in 1997, every night, a week before and into the event. The third night, we were leaving the hotel over here on Main Street, heading down, and I got a call from our publicity agent. He said, Joe, I'm on the way down from Charlotte, and I'm going through the worst rainstorm I have ever been through in my life. I mean, it is coming down in buckets. I said, okay. And I got on my phone. I said, let me see what I can do. And I got on my phone, and I called Anderson Flight Service. Every now and then, being a pilot comes in good. Back in then, you couldn't go on the internet and get weather immediately and all that, but I could go to flight service. So I called flight service, and I said, this is Lake Amphibian 555 Tango Delta, and I would like to know what the weather is in the next hour around Columbia. I said, well, there's a big storm. There's a big line of thunderstorms. It's solid. It's stretching all the way from Lancaster down through Newberry, and it's about 20 miles wide, and it's extremely heavy. It tops up to 40 or 50,000 feet. I said, do you think there's any way it'll miss Columbia? Miss Columbia? I don't see how. It's solid. It's solid. So we went in that little room that the football players have at the stadium, and we briefed everybody. If it starts storming and the lightning, we're going to have to get people to safety underneath the stands. We're going to have to bring the stage down. It's got to come down because of lightning, and get people off the stage, and you'll go in the end room. But then we said, now we're going to have a word of prayer. We're going to do a round of prayer. And I prayed, Lord, if it be your will, let this storm pass from here. And all our other brothers and preachers that are far more powerful with God than me prayed, Lord, if it be your will, let us. We'd sure like nothing to happen here. But there's a little old lady who'd been helping us named Linda Furr, who had come down from Charlotte and lived with us while she helped us do the ministry. She came to about here on me, and all of a sudden it came her time to pray. And she said, she said, storm, in the name of Jesus, I take charge of you. We're all looking around at each other, you know. You will go around this stadium. She didn't say if, maybe, what, nothing. You'll go around this stadium. We got up on that stage that night, and people had come because they had their umbrellas out there and stuff. But we watched this look like a wall. I don't know if you've ever been around a dust storm and seen a dust storm coming to you, but it looks like a wall coming towards you. That's the way that storm looked, like a wall. And it got right out there about a mile or two, and it started doing like this. It started doing like this. And as it came around, there were just a few little sprinkles that kind of came in for us that might not have been quite the believers we should have been. And umbrellas began to pop up around the stadium. It looked like a poppy field. I mean, they were just red umbrellas, blue umbrellas, green umbrellas, and all a beautiful sight. But only a few drops of rain came. And then it got on the other side, and it started coming back together. The miracles of God. Now, that was the event. CityLight was formed prior to that event in order to promote the event. We had no plans, really, to go beyond that event at that time. But then we pulled together and had a little meeting and said, well, hey, God really blessed. What shall we do? And so we started having monthly meetings again. And for years, every month we'd have a meeting. There'd be 10 or 12 of us that would be meeting together. And then one day I heard a good brother of mine, in a meeting with him, and it was boring. I hate boring meetings. And it was kind of boring, and it got around to the end, and all of a sudden this fellow named Redfern stood up. And the meeting came to life. And when the meeting came to life, I began to say, who is this fella? And they said, well, that's Redford. He actually helped us out during the crusade. He had this thing called the Black News, and we did advertising through him. I think Brother Eddie brought him together at that time, brought us together. And we did some advertising with him. And so we got to talking to him, and he got involved with us. Now, that's the reason you're here today. But let me tell you, we're blessed with that success, and I'm going to try to end real quickly here to tell you this. As things get bigger and bigger, I didn't tell you about the $500,000 that Linda White said we would need for a budget for that stadium, but that's what she said when we brought her in to help us with putting that together. $500,000, where are we going to get that kind of money? But God had already brought us that far, so I went down and talked to the bank and says, I don't know what we can raise. Would you be willing to put it on a 15-year note, and I'll get another house payment and pay that off myself if it has to be. And so the $500,000 that I had trusted God that far, I had no choice but to continue. And then as my tenure came to an end at Precision Tune, lo and behold, they'd given me some stock. And I thought I'd be paying for that for 15 years. Without telling you the details, God paid off that. By the end of that crusade, it was paid off. But we're in another position now. Our budget has grown here to about $185,000. We actually set it at $250,000, but last year $185,000 way we could go. I want you to stand up. Oh, I want you to stand up. Stand up. Stand up. Now, I'm not going to tell you to get your purse out and get your checkbook out, but I still want you to stand up. Because I don't do anything without a signal from God. If he doesn't give the signal, there's no need in me trying to do it because I'll fail. I can't do it.
Right.
Now, $185,000, we got up to where we're saying we're our max. We have another large donor that has helped us out. But we need some others. We need your prayers. We need you. If you got a napkin in front of you or whatever you got in front of you, a piece of paper, if you would say how you could help continue this if you wanted to continue. Because I'm telling you about Joe Grimaud, I am listed as chairman. I don't desire to be founder, whatever they want to call me. I'm here. It's not something I need. If God doesn't need it, I don't need it. But if we're going to continue, we do have to. Redfern has done a phenomenal job of growing this thing to where we're reaching literally around the world today with prayer groups. We really are. So prayer groups have been started. But as these things get bigger and bigger, it takes more and more funds to support. And if the funds don't come in, I'm the type of guy that doesn't commit myself to something that can't be paid for, because God doesn't need to be shamed by a bill sitting there that's not paid for because one of his people said, hey, I want to do this. So I'm just telling you, if you want to be a participant in a committee, if you want to provide money, we right now, just these breakfast meetings and this Catalyst magazine are running us about $2,500 a month. We don't get enough in here to cover that each month even. And we do allow people to participate. But money is always involved. It's always involved. We can't get away from it. There's not a pastor here that has a church that doesn't have to look at the money that's involved in keeping God's ministry. I don't want you to take a cent away from your church. Whatever God has done for you and you're doing for your church, don't mess with it. I'm not here to mess with God's work in your church. We're here to support churches. We're here to help churches come together to do God's work. So we don't want to take a thing away from a church. Don't do it. But if God can bless you with something extra in some capacity, whether it's in work effort, whether it's in volunteerism, whether it's in money, then let us know about it. You can let me know about it. You'll figuratively offer your billfolds, okay? You figuratively, I'm not going to ask you to do what I asked them in the Coliseum. If you feel led to do that, we won't turn it down. But I'm not going to ask you to do that. Now, God bless you. I've probably taken way more of my time. I've hardly even looked at that paper that was supposed to slow me down. But I've got hours left to tell you. And sometime when you got nothing else to do, follow me around for a while, and I'll tell you about the rest. God bless you.